The train screeched to a halt in the middle of a sunburned prairie town. The sound of iron wheels grinding against the tracks cutting through the wide silence of the land. Dust swirled in the hot air, carrying the scent of dry earth and coal smoke. Among the tired passengers stepping off with their bags was a woman who looked out of place, not because of her fine dress but because of the weight she carried in her eyes. Her name was Clara Whitmore, and though her lace gloves and carefully pinned hair suggested refinement, her trembling hands betrayed something else. She had traveled for days across endless miles of country, leaving behind a past filled with whispered shame and unshed tears, and she had come here with only one thought echoing in her heart like a painful confession. I've been aching down there. It wasn't the kind of ache people spoke of openly. It was the ache of loneliness, the ache of carrying secrets too heavy to share, the ache of longing for tenderness in a life where cruelty had been her companion. Clara carried it in her chest, in her stomach, in her bones, an ache that no doctor could heal, no medicine could soothe. And yet she had answered an ad. A desperate ad placed in a small-town newspaper by a cowboy who claimed he was tired of sleeping alone and eating in silence. A cowboy who promised nothing but a roof, food, and perhaps the chance at something more. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the kind of stories where broken souls find unexpected light, please pause here for a moment. Like this video, share it with someone who might need a spark of hope today, and subscribe to The Gentle Truth. Your support keeps these heart-touching stories alive. The cowboy's name was Elias Boone. He lived far from the town, on a stretch of land that seemed to fade into the horizon itself. People described him as quiet, steady, and a little too big for this world. Broad shoulders bent from years of working the land, hands calloused from gripping reins and axes, eyes the pale blue of winter skies. He was a man who rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen loss and carried it without complaint. For years, Elias had lived alone in his cabin, his only companions the creak of the wooden porch and the howling winds across the plains. When he wrote to the mail-order bride agency, he hadn't expected much. Maybe someone who could cook, someone who could share the burdens of the land. He had no illusions about love. Love was for poets and dreamers, and Elias was neither. But when Clara stepped down from that train, her eyes searching the crowd with equal parts fear and hope, something inside him shifted. She was not what he expected. She was softer, more fragile, like a bird that had been battered by storms and still somehow found the strength to fly. The journey from town to his ranch was long and silent. Clara sat beside him in the wagon, her gloved hands clutching a small suitcase, her eyes fixed on the endless stretch of prairie. Elias glanced at her once, noticing the way her lips trembled, as though she carried words she couldn't bring herself to say. She carried the ache silently at first, letting it weigh down her posture, her every movement. But silence has a way of making the ache louder, and one evening, as the sky burned red and gold with sunset, she finally let the words escape. She confessed, not with shame but with trembling honesty, that she had been aching down there. Not in the way some might cruelly assume, but in the deeper, more human way. She ached for safety. She ached for kindness. She ached for someone to look at her and not see a burden or a mistake. Elias did not answer with words. He never was a man of many words. But his silence was not cruel. His silence was the silence of someone listening, someone understanding without judgment. That night, he carried a chair out onto the porch, set it beside his own, and let her sit there in the quiet. They watched the stars prick the sky, the prairie wind brushing against them, and for the first time, Clara felt the ache ease just a little. Life on the ranch was not easy for her. Clara had grown up in a city where carriages rolled on cobblestone streets and shop windows gleamed with polished goods. Out here, everything was raw and unyielding. The mornings came with chores, fetching water, gathering eggs, kneading bread. The afternoons meant tending to animals, mending clothes, patching fences. Her hands blistered, her back ached, and more than once she wept alone in the barn, wondering if she had made a mistake. Yet every time she thought of leaving, she remembered the way Elias had looked at her when she confessed her pain. Not with pity, not with judgment, but with something like quiet recognition. Elias, too, carried his own aches. Years ago, he had lost his younger brother to illness, and with him, he lost the laughter that used to fill the cabin. His parents had long since passed, and though neighbors respected him, no one truly knew him. Loneliness had dug its roots deep inside him, leaving scars no one could see. Clara's presence, fragile as it was, began to change that. She filled the cabin with small sounds, a kettle whistling, pages turning, soft humming as she worked. Slowly, the silence that had once been his companion began to feel less comforting and more unbearable when she wasn't there. But their road was not without trials. The townsfolk whispered about her, about where she came from, about why she had left her home. Some said she was running from scandal. Others claimed she was a fallen woman trying to buy her way back into respectability. Clara heard those whispers when she went into town for supplies, and each word cut her open. Her ache returned stronger, making her feel like no matter where she went, she would never escape the weight of judgment. It was Elias who stood by her, quietly but firmly. When men muttered insults under their breath, Elias's sheer presence silenced them. When women gave her sharp looks, Clara held her head a little higher, because Elias's steady gaze told her she belonged. He never gave speeches, never promised her the world. But when he took her hand, rough and calloused against hers, she knew he meant every unspoken word. As the months passed, something tender bloomed between them. It was not a grand romance filled with sweeping gestures or poetic declarations. It was a quiet love built brick by brick, through shared burdens and unspoken care. The ache that Clara carried began to heal, not because Elias fixed it, but because he gave her the space to heal herself. And Elias, in turn, found that the silence of his cabin no longer haunted him, because it was filled with her presence, her laughter, her tears, her humanity. One evening, under a sky scattered with stars, Clara pressed her forehead against Elias's chest and whispered once more about her aching. But this time it was different. It was no longer the ache of loneliness, it was the ache of finally being vulnerable, of finally allowing herself to love and be loved in return. Elias, with his steady heart and unshakable strength, held her close, and in that embrace, the ache finally found peace. So their story became not one of desperation, but one of redemption. A story of two lonely souls, one aching for tenderness and the other aching for connection, who found in each other the kind of quiet love that doesn't dazzle the world but steadies it. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even the deepest aches can be healed by kindness, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to The Gentle Truth. Your support brings more stories of courage and love to life. And before we close, here's a special request. Drop a comment below with the words "the ache can heal" to remind yourself and others that no matter how heavy the pain feels, love and second chances are always possible.